Hi, my name's Chris. I'm a Raleigh native, well, North Carolina native. I live in Raleigh. Have since I graduated East Carolina University. Woo, Pirates, let's go. You know who the drinkers are in the room for sure. All right. I did a few in my college years. So a little bit about me. I went to East Carolina. I grew up in Pinehurst. I am a golfer. I have a golf tournament this weekend. I'm going to lose probably because I've been on the road since Wednesday. I think I've been wearing the same outfit since Monday. But I've been in security for quite a bit, kind of by accident. I started my career doing some sales. We won't talk about that. And then I ended up at BB&T doing help desk consulting for a hot bit, and then transitioned over to First Citizens. Did a few years there, and then took a job out in the park for a buddy of mine who just happened to work for a competitor to CyberArk. That was in 2005. So I've been doing this privileged access management stuff for almost 2 decades, which is pretty crazy to see all the cool stuff that it's done. I watched the young lady that was on stage before. I believe her name was Galen, and so I'm probably going to quote some of the stuff that she used because I think it was really impactful. Her 4 fundamentals of security during my bits of presentation. I also walked around the room, as I always do, just kind of listened to people and what some of the buzzwords that they have been using. So I'm going to incorporate some of that into my presentation. If you see me skip a slide or two, don't worry. It's not that it's not important. It just might be something that we talk about if you ever decide to ring up CyberArk and talk about our security offerings. I am not going to give you a sales pitch. That is not my job to sell you software. It is that guy over there in the corner and the young lady sitting 2 rows behind him. That is the core team. They can talk to you all about cool sales stuff outside, but I'm not here to sell you any software. I'm just here to tell you what's available and how the thing works. So what is identity security? So when I first started, we were privileged identity management. It's grown, obviously. Past couple of years, we've been kind of moving to this identity security because there is this convergence of identity and access management and what we used to refer to as PAM. We've been talking about privileged access management for a long time now, but it really is securing high-risk access. I ask customers all the time, define PAM for me, and this is typically what I get is I've got some high-level admins and I need to secure them. But why? So I heard them talking about LinkedIn. They were doing this little LinkedIn thing at Duke, and they were saying about how they sent out some LinkedIn clicks and all these other things. It was really interesting to me because I used to use LinkedIn in the attack chain way back when we were doing lunch and learns when I first started. It's been almost 13 years now. So the idea behind an attack is really quite simple. It's social engineering. If you heard about the Uber breach or the LastPass breach, I'm going to dissect that one just here in a minute. But social engineering is becoming really big, and I think proof point numbers that Galen had on the screen before really kind of pointed that out. 98%, right? 98% of attacks have social engineering kind of at the start of it. And we say over 95% of those attacks have a credential somewhere in the mix. Because you can't just automatically go from outside of the world to a domain controller. You need some sort of authentication there. So credentials are pretty big. But the idea is internal, external threat vectors, right? They look to escalate privileges as they move in. We saw this way back when Target and Home Depot got breached. There was some way in, and I used to say, how many people have a LinkedIn account? And everybody in the room would be like, yeah, I got one. I'm like, you're a target. You're a target. Because ultimately they are. I can go to LinkedIn and I can look up a company and I can look up just about every database administrator or every developer that's in that organization and then just send them emails. I did a presentation one time in Toronto. We were doing a Star Wars thing, like, hey, come watch the new Star Wars movie and listen to us talk about cybersecurity. And this CISO brought her son, and I was talking to the son afterwards, like, hey, did you learn anything? And the response that he gave me was something that I had brought up, which was, you send out an email, to 20, 30 people and say, hey, check out this job posting. It's got a 7-figure salary, lets you use a house in Cabo, 10 weeks of vacation time. I was like, who's going to click on the link? And everybody was like, me. And the kid was like, yeah, I learned if you click on bad links, you don't get to go to Cabo. Fair. So that's the idea, right? Is like, how do I social engineer an attack? Oh, well, I just send people cool stuff and they click on it. And then the idea is once they're in, they're in. Then it's just a matter of how do I move laterally across the environment. And the idea is, you know, we used to say, oh, they're looking for credentials or password hashes and things like that. But this slide, the other iteration of this that I did not bring with me, talks about identity compromise. I voted for identity theft, but that movie was terrible, so we decided to go with identity compromise. But then the idea is to get to somewhere where they're looking for some sort of data, whether that's credit card numbers or just these days is really just a name, an email address, and a phone number, and that's worth millions to some 12-year-old. Because they can sell it for multiple times. But that's the idea that happened with the LastPass attack, is that you had this attacker that basically just looked for a low-level engineer. And in my eyes, there's no such thing as a low-level engineer because essentially everybody in this room has some sort of privilege. I don't care if you're a CIO or you're a, outside of this room, even a custodial engineer has a key to a room that nobody has access to except for that team. So everybody is important. Everybody has some sort of identity. Everybody has some sort of privilege to something. And that's the idea, is that they went after an engineer that didn't have a whole lot of rights. But then essentially what they did is they started looking for ways of being able to take advantage of maybe a help desk engineer has connected to that system. Maybe they were able to laterally move across another environment. Maybe there's credentials stored on that workstation that gets them into something else. If you're honest and you answer this question, if you don't raise your hand, you're lying to yourself. Okay, are you ready for this? Who here has reused the same password for 2 different websites? Right? And if you're not raising your hand, right? Yeah, right? Okay, so Galen had pointed out, use a password manager, put MFA on it. She was literally, I did not pay her, I promise. Like, she was literally advertising for the things that CyberArk provide. But the idea is that I'm looking for a credential. It's going to give me the ability to move across the bits. And look what they found. They found that master password to LastPass. That's exactly what she was talking about. Like, put MFA on LastPass, put MFA on your password store, because just because you're storing all credentials in there, even Dashlane, right? If there's not MFA on it, they were able to steal AWS credentials. Boom, they're in. They have admin rights to AWS. They had access to AWS S3 buckets, which of course that's where all the data is. And then boom, that's where they were able to breach LastPass. So this happens quite frequently. Uber did it with MFA fatigue. There's a kid, literally a teenager, sent out they found this user, got the password. They were trying to use the password. It was an MFA block, and then they were like, well, whatever. I'll just text them over WhatsApp. Say, hey, this is IT. Can you accept that? And they were like, sure, click. So it's MFA fatigue. It's password fatigue. It's people just doing whatever they do just to get security off of their brain. And that's kind of what happened there. But what we used to say was, you know what? Hey, here's what security looks like 20 years ago. Just put it in the vault, meaning the credential, and we'll rotate it. And then when you need it, cool. You can get it whenever you need it, or AKA just in time, and then be able to log on to all these databases. Chad and I used to wear t-shirts that said, keep calm and vault everything. I don't know if you actually had one of those t-shirts, but I did, right? And that was like, whoa, that was our answer to security back then. But obviously times have changed, and we need to make sure that we're looking at what attack paths look like today, right? This is maybe a little bit of yesteryear, but identity compromise, privilege escalation, blah, 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 right? But now it's, let me gather intelligence about your employees, LinkedIn, right? Move around, look for some things, put some credential harvesting on some endpoints, and then elevate to domain admin, and then pull some sensitive data out. The original PAM, the original privilege access management, is literally right here. That's all it is. That's the traditional PAM scope. But now privilege access is so much more than that. So we're going to talk about what that means, what that looks like. So there's all these cool new environments, new identities, blah, 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 right? This is such a marketecture slide. But that's the idea, is that there's so many different spectrum of identities. You guys remember the movie Office Space? Right? Remember those fractions of pennies that they were pulling out of people's paychecks, right? It could happen. If your HR admin just decides to go rogue and then breach into the payroll admin's account, now that person has access to everybody's paychecks, everybody's RSUs, whatever it is that they're getting. We used to pick on ours, and then she retired. But there's all these new environments, new attack methods. I'm sure everybody's probably moving into the cloud, which is another one of those buzzwords that I heard outside, which is cloud security. So the idea is that, hey, there's things happening. Machine identities is really huge. I used to tell, because I was coming from the banking world, hey, I'm a teller, and I need to access the mainframe to pull information for the user that's asking about, or the customer. Well, guess what? There's an application credential that is stored in the code that says, hey, log into the mainframe with this credential. Well, that's bad, because if they get access to that code, they have access to the credentials. But the number of machines, identities, right, applications, scripts, or whatever, right, is growing now 45 to 1. This is not a commercial for iRobot or anything like that that's going to say that machines are going to take over the world, but they certainly are taking over our enterprises as far as the number of identities that exist out there. So the idea here is that numbers, everybody's growing, blah, 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 that's the marketing side, is that we are looking at CyberArk at 4 different spectrum of identities. The workforce, which is pretty much everybody that are customers of ours, right? People like me, I'm a workforce user. I'm not an IT guy. I used to be. I used to have domain admin to First Citizens Bank. As a matter of fact, before they started using the CyberArk solution, I could probably walk into a branch, use my old ID, walk into the server room and log into the server. I could almost repeat it because it was something that I used every single day. But then they started rotating those passwords and everybody's cool. So developers, is anybody a developer in this room? Develop code? Okay, I apologize when I say this, but they are the #1 target, okay? Because they have, let me rephrase. They demand the most access out of everybody in the entire building. It's true, because I need admin rights to this, and I need admin rights to that, and I need to be able to write this code, and I need to be able to shift it up to GitHub. There's all these things that kind of fit in this bucket, and that's why, unfortunately, I apologize, that's why they're in the red and not necessarily the orange or the yellow or the green. And then, of course, there's the machines. And the machines are pretty much directed, hey, I've got access from this to this, and that's about it. But what else does it have access to? Who knows? An attacker's going to find out. So the idea is that PAM started here. It's kind of hard to read maybe. Personal credentials, built-in SID 500 accounts, root, UID 0, etc. We said put it in the vault and rotate it. Now I'm calling that foundational PAM. It is foundational to security, it's foundational to identity security, and it's still foundational to PAM, if you will. But now it's about extending those same mentalities, methodologies, etc., regardless of the tool that is used, extending those same controls to other things. So what does that look like? How do we utilize it? Well, guess what? PAM starts here, administrator, root, SA. You don't really need to use administrator if you're logging into a server. I can say that because I've been in those seats before. If I just had maybe a personal elevated account that looked something like this, one of our customers in Durham, they used to call it resource admin account. So it was like Chris_RA. And then it was like, okay. So I had this other company tell me that they have 4 accounts. Each person is responsible for 4 accounts, and 2 of which are MFA'd. I said, what? Like, no. So they had a personal account for email. They had an elevated account to get to the vault. Then they had another account that was, or 2 accounts in the vault that were getting rotated, and both of those had MFA on it. And I said, how do you keep track of all that password? Are they all the same password? And they're like, no. And then he sat there and he goes, probably. Probably. So we have to understand that there's other spectrum of identities, and this is from a security perspective, the things that we're thinking about is extending the same PAM mentalities, the same methodologies to secure all of these other folks, including the people that are writing our paychecks. I don't want anybody breaching that dude or gal because I like my paycheck. So we have to consider that there are other identities that need security, need the same type of controls. So we've reimagined, right? Marketing says I have to use that phrase. Marketing says PAM reimagined because it's no longer PAM equals the vault. It's now everything else that you kind of see on the screen. And I'm going to talk a little bit techie as we go through this so you guys can see kind of what this looks like. But the idea is two things that we have to kind of consider. The risk of identity and access compromise. That is, okay, if somebody compromises my office manager that has access to email and internet and things like that, is it as big of a deal as the domain admin? Probably not. I asked a customer yesterday in DC, I said, do you put your cloud admins, aka AWS administrators, contributor, owner rights to Azure, etc., do you put them on the same level as you do your domain admins? And he goes, He's like, no, but I do now, because I understand what you're saying is that they're equivalent. But as the risk of identity and access compromises moves over to the right and gets into that red zone, like where the developers are, sorry again, we have to increase the level of control. But then what you get is this user pushing back and saying, that's too much. I don't want MFA every single time I'm trying to connect to a system. I don't want you to tell me that I have to, use a password, an MFA, my Face ID or whatever the case may be. I don't want all that. But technology constraint is also a thing, because I can't use the same type of information security technology to get into a Windows box that I can do to a web application, right? Because one might be a username and password and the other one might be federated access. So we have to understand that there's technology constraint as well. So these are the things that CyberArk thinks about on a regular basis, is how do I inject security without making everybody in the room just super, super angry. So let's talk a little bit techie here, because again, architecture slide, it's cool colors, but system level access, this is admin, root, SA, all of those accounts that are traditionally never going away. Regardless of if you want passwordless or not, it's absolutely not going away. But would I need to give a developer, admin access or root to a Unix system or SA to a database? The answer is absolutely not. There's no reason for it. But if I could give them operational access to give them the right permissions at the right time for the right amount of time, they can do their job seamlessly. The idea here is that I execute this like SSH command, blah, 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 all these attributes, and then it creates a user, or in Unix case, a temporary SSH signed certificate, and then at the end of that session, it just deletes it. So the user has no idea what a password is to get into that system. And same with Windows, is that when I get into Windows, I'm just creating a user on the fly, putting them in the right group, which has GPOs or permissions assigned to it, whatever the case may be. By the way, there's a CyberArk tool for that. But the idea is that when they're done, we just take the user right out of that group and delete the user. So that way there's no breadcrumbs left behind, there's nothing. So if you want to talk more techie, we can definitely do that. But same idea for cloud access. If I'm trying to get into AWS or Azure or GCP, instead of having direct connection with those roles and those permission sets in AWS, all I got to do is create the user or create the permission connection on the fly. So when the user clicks connect to get into AWS, that says, well, tell me what role you want to use today. Admin access? Sure, who cares? But what happens is that CyberArk puts that user in the right permission set or connects them to that right role. And then at the end of that session, we just take them out. So that way, when you're vacationing in Jamaica or in Alaska or whatever floats your boat, your account gets compromised, who cares, right? There's no permissions there. You're just a domain user, or you're just a cloud person, and they can have access to absolutely nothing. Even S3 buckets where all the customer data is stored. So that's kind of our idea, is like, oh, I'm gonna get rid of that. I call that the UFO slide, but it doesn't seem to work. But the idea is that PAM programs contain so much, and there's always a place to start. And obviously, with our expertise, we kind of help guide customers where they need to start and finish. But let's talk about what's not in the IT world, right? So we have to think about securing the working environment, which is me and Chad and Jeff and Deb and Josh. Did I miss anybody? No, I think that's all. is, first of all, when Galen was on the stage at Duke before, she was mentioning, I did pronounce that correct. It's great, Galen. Okay, cool. Thank you for the nod. That when she was talking about MFA, like it's important. I will tell you that there's not a lot of companies that don't have MFA today, but there's a lot of companies that don't utilize it as much as they should be doing. So MFA, but the reason that there's the phrase adaptive in front of that is because we know where you're coming from. We know what time of day you typically work. We don't tell your boss, but we know when to prompt you and when not to prompt you. And that's what adaptive means, is that we're adapting to the user's everyday life. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. Not only that, we're providing, I don't know if it doesn't say it here, but different factors of authentication. So instead of, who still carries around a secure ID token? Oh, wow. There's investor analysts that do the same thing. I was in RSA a couple weeks ago, and they all was like whipping out this like RSA token. I'm like, dude, like, no. It could, right? It depends. Is it SMS? Is that your MFA option? I hope not, because that can be, it could be, right? Because we have SMS too, I'm not gonna lie. But if there's an app on the phone and you use that to authenticate, fingerprint readers are my favorite because I'm wicked lazy. But there's all these new age versions of MFA factors that we have to make sure that we provide the user. The other one is web sessions. There's a lot more SaaS out there, right? More people using SaaS. We want to protect the cloud. We want to protect SaaS applications. So we're not going to change federation to using a username and password and vaulting it, like absolutely not. But what we're going to do is we're going to add additional layers of security on top of the federation. So things like session recording, where, hey, somebody gets to an admin role, maybe we want to record some of that stuff. But then also being able to look at, let's say, for example, I use this one example with a customer of ours. I said, do you ever use a computer to access your company system from a system that's not company asset? And they were like, yeah, sure. I did that today, as a matter of fact. I had to get, they wanted me to put my presentation on a USB thumb drive. And I was like, oh, that's going to be hard. So, because cybersecurity, right? They don't allow us to use USB. I couldn't use my SD drive. I couldn't use anything. I couldn't email it because it was 52 megs, this presentation that you're seeing. So I had to go and like kind of break the rules. I logged onto my personal laptop. I logged onto our IDP system. And then I was like, ooh, I can use this app. And I just uploaded the file, and then I downloaded it and put it on the USB drive, and here you are. So we have to consider making sure that we could maybe say, oh, I'm sorry, you can't access that web application unless you're coming from an asset that has the correct security on it. All the way over to personal business creds, back to that, hey, I use the same password. Look, I'm guilty of it too. Even I use one password personally, and it yells at me all the time, like, this is a reused password. I'm like, sorry. But they don't allow me to use one password on my work laptop because we sell a solution for it. So I have to use my phone a lot to remember and type in all those weird credentials. But understanding that there are personal business credentials that need to be managed, you need a safe place to put it. Galen said it before, use a password manager. It's pretty simple. Let it change your password. Let it give you what a password needs to be, or even better, just click a button and let the magic happen where it'll go and change the password or put in a new password and confirm it, so you don't actually have to type it or copy and paste it or anything. And then lastly, if there is Salesforce admins or some website that has a password, we want to put it in the vault, we want to rotate it, but we don't want to have to like tell a non-IT person to go to this weird IT application to get to their application. Like, that's a hard no-no. So we want SSO-like experience, blah, 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 blah. So let's talk a little bit about personas, and I'll get you guys back to the booze or go home to your kids if you really want to. I want to focus in on the developer here for a hot second. So this is Ava, and I apologize, it was a dude before, and I didn't have time to switch it, but this is Ava. She's amazing. This actually has a story behind it. We have a guy named Evan, and we turned him into a female. So she can be Ava, because we didn't have any personas that were female at the time. Ava has been with us for 6 years now. She's awesome. But Ava has a lot to do. Cloud CLI, IDE tools to like Visual Studio, etc. So Ava has a lot to do on our workstation. We created a solution a few years ago, a couple years ago, and we said, oh, developers access the cloud. They go to the cloud consoles. And we go to customers and they're like, no, they don't. They do IDE tools, they write stuff on their workstation, they upload it to GitHub, and then like Terraform kicks in and sends it over to the cloud, something of the like. There are some developers that access the cloud, but it's not as much as we would think. So what Ava needs to consider is that we have to secure emergency access. We have to make sure that Ava has the ability to do her job without a whole lot of things going on and MFA fatigue, etc. So we do all the things that we've talked about, but then all of a sudden, this happens. So everybody knows what cookies are, right? So this is probably the newest, coolest thing. And it's not even new, it's just like we're seeing a lot more, is that cookie hijacking is happening where I've authenticated to my IDP, and then I've got that cookie and it's got that time frame on it that allows me to be able to authenticate to any application. That's what I'm gonna go after if I'm an attacker. But what happens if that cookie doesn't exist on the local workstation, right? So that's what CyberArk did, is we said, well, cool, let's create a secure browser to basically take that cookie and send it up to the cloud. That's all it does. It just puts it in CyberArk's identity cloud for each individual user, and then we can prevent it from being local on the disk. So that way, an attacker doesn't really have anything. So we're eliminating password hashes. We've got adaptive MFA, and we're taking the cookie and shoving it up to the cloud, and now we don't have to worry about that anymore. But then there's other cool things that we can do with Secure Browser, and this is something that we're giving away to our customers that own our licensing. We're not monetizing this in any way, shape, or form for now. That's what my CFO tells me to say. So what happens here? So you've got Ava or Bob or whoever. When I worked at First Citizens, I used to use stick figures a lot, and I would call him Bob because I used to work with a guy named Bob Gallagher. So Bob became the stick figure. He was tall and kind of lanky. But anyway, so Bob here, Ava, logs on to CyberArk, MFA. I'm sorry that if you guys can't see that, I'll kind of step out of the way a little bit. But then the idea here is that, like I said, we're provisioning that access on the fly. So Bob or Ava can get to the tools that they need to access on the fly, but then when Bob or Ava are done with that session, we just remove those permissions altogether. And it's quite simple and seamless because this little action here is just so normal and easy for them. That's what they do every single day, even if there's not a cybersecurity solution watching and creating that access in the background. So if we think about machines have that same level of requirement. So again, here's a user that needs to be able to kind of manage this application. Well, that application needs to be able to log into some database, mainframe, other computer, whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, how do I log in? All right, cool. First thing I need to do is just get a password from CyberArk. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a trillion things that sit in this little bucket right here. It could be a token, it could be a certificate, it could be a credential, it could be a lot of different things. We basically have the idea of let's give that application an identity first, then give it access to what it needs to be able to do the authentication, and then it's able to come back and give that communication line and keep it open. So that's the idea behind what machine to machine is doing, is it's getting an identity, it's getting the access that it needs, and then going off and making that authentication happen. Now, not all things can run an API, so we have to make sure that there's ways of gaining access to some sort of authentication credential to be able to do this. But there's ways of handling a lot of tools that may require credential. Who here uses vulnerability scanning, like I do? Who here uses RPA, right? All those need credentials. So the idea is that we can start there. We don't have to go to like Java apps and other things that require credentials. Or I said WebLogic the other day to a customer, and he was like, we still use that, which is pretty wild. So we have to make sure that we provide this umbrella of options. That's really hard for me to say because Rihanna ruined it, and now it's umbrella. But the idea here is that we got to make sure that there's a ton of options. Whether it's a credential like mini vault sitting on the application server, whether it's the ability for it to retrieve some sort of certificate, whatever the case may be, we got to make sure that all of those options are available. because this is what a DevOps pipeline looks like. This is what applications look like. There it is over there at WebSphere. You can see WebLogic, Tomcat. Apache server is how, Jeff, was it Equifax? That was Apache servers that got attacked. So they're out there, and there's credentials and allowed them to be able to move about. But all the way over here to the container platforms, orchestration tools, Kubernetes, OpenShift, EKS, all of the above, we have an option for pretty much everything that you can think of. And of course, right there in the middle is Rapid7, Tenable. My spouse works for Proofpoint, which Galen was giving some props to Proofpoint, which is kind of cool. But they are a big partner of ours because that, what do they call it? That very attacked user. So it basically says that, like Jeff here, he's a clicker. That has a whole new theme now with the show on HBO, the virus thing or the fungus thing. They're called clickers. What's it called?
The Last of Us.
Yeah, Last of Us. I did play that video game. And I was really impressed with the movie, the show. And I can't wait for season 2 to come out. But if you ever watch it, they're real weird looking dudes, and they're called clickers. But Jeff clicks a lot, and so we have to make sure that Jeff, because he's doing the little finger motion. If you can't see him, it's really weird. But Jeff is a frequent clicker, and so as Jeff goes in and clicks on a lot of links and the emails and things like that, the job in Cabo. Basically, we got to make sure that Jeff's system is locked down as much as possible if Jeff happens to click on the wrong link. And so Proofpoint says, hey, CyberArk, this dude, Jeff, is clicking on everything possible. So we got to make sure we lock him down so we can then take that information and prevent him from gaining access to all of the applications that may have some sort of intelligent property within it. So this next slide, I super apologize, don't look at it, but the reason that I'm showing it is because CyberArk does a lot. And every time I go to a conference, CyberArk is always, oh, you guys are the Vault guys. Yeah, that's the trouble of cybersecurity software. Sometimes you can grow and people just kind of put you in this little bucket. So if this is something that you're interested in or telling your directors or managers or CISOs about, we would absolutely appreciate it. Our ex-CRO took this very personal. Chad remembers, we were in, maybe even Jeff too, we were sitting in a room much like this. And as a software sales company, our job is to hit numbers every quarter. These are sales numbers. We have to make them. It's dollar amounts. And he got really emotional when we almost didn't hit our number one time. And he says, you have to remember, we are here to protect and secure the free world. Like that was his mission, to help our customers. He got really emotional about it because he was saying, we're letting our customers and then other businesses down by not providing our cybersecurity solution for them. So CyberArk does a ton for different personas down the left-hand side, making the secure browser available, making workforce password management available. It's simple tools that sit in the background that are seamless and as easy and as adaptive as possible. And that's what CyberArk does, is manage and secure all of these different identities. So bottom of my heart, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time. Rob Martin is a very good friend of mine. We both went to the same college, Pirates, woo! And we've known him for quite a long time. And we will be at what I'm now is being told is InfoSecCon. I've been calling it InfoSecCon for years. Information Security Conference, but the CCon, now I need to reevaluate everything. I'm assuming that we're sponsoring. Hopefully we'll get a keynote, we'll get a breakout, whatever the case may be. And I promise, again, we will not do a sales pitch. We will make sure that it's a little bit more technical focused. So again, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it. I got 37 minutes in, which is not too bad. So really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good evening and an awesome weekend.